This is the Birth, Baby, and Life podcast with Kristen Burgess, and we're taking a quantum fertility leap in episode number 203. Hey mama, today we are going to talk about quantum biology. Now, what is that, you may ask? I am going to be really happy to share. If you don't know me, my name is Kristen. I'm a pregnancy coach, and I work with mamas all over the world, helping them to enjoy their pregnancy, to grow a healthy baby, and to have a beautiful birth. I also work with mamas who want to create an intentional, happy home filled with their happy children. So with that, again, okay, what is quantum biology and quantum fertility and all of that stuff that sounds like it might be out of a science fiction flick? Well, firstly, I'm going to definitely link to some resources below because I first started studying this year with Nico Kennedy and looking at her practitioner program where she's teaching others about what is quantum biology and how does this impact our life? And I really got into this as I was working on the fertility class, which I'll also link below. And I was just so fascinated by it. I think it's so exciting to look at quantum biology and especially how looking at pregnancy, birth, fertility, and those sorts of things from a quantum biology lens really helps to, I think, increase the health of mothers and babies, increase fertility, of course. And so it's just so important. So I'm going to link to Nico below because definitely she's the one who knows the most. And if y'all are really interested in this, I know she does podcasts, so I'll try and get her on a podcast episode shortly as well. But having said that, so let's talk about like what is quantum fertility, Kristen. Let's start by talking about energy. So we want to look at energy and we want to think about organized energy and thinking about how do we organize energy to have a healthy baby. So quantum biology, which sounds like something out of science fiction flick for sure, but it's actually looking at health from the smallest possible unit. So you're looking at health on a molecular level. Basically, how do we enhance our molecular health, which enhances our cellular health, which influences our whole body health. And when we look at that molecular level, you probably remember, or maybe you remember from high school when we studied, molecules and that sort of thing, and we studied that there was positive and negative charges and energy. So quantum biology is really concerned with looking particularly at energy and how does energy impact our bodies and our health, and again, on a molecular level, but especially a cellular level. Because electric impulses control a lot in the body from a cellular level. So quantum biology is looking at that energy and looking at that really, I don't want to say base level of health because that doesn't sound right, but just looking at that level of health even on the smallest units of our body, that molecular and cellular health level. And it's really beneficial to your baby and it's beneficial to you. In fact, I have seen that addressing fertility issues and some pregnancy issues from a quantum biology perspective has brought a lot of relief to clients in ways that even, like for example, nutrition, which is something I'm a strong proponent of, hasn't been able to do quite as well. So quantum biology isn't really something to use on its own. That's not at all how I've incorporated it into the way that I'm working with clients. But it is another tool in our holistic toolkit. And quantum biology it's an established field at this point, and you can especially find like animal studies with it. But we're really at the very beginning of starting to look at fertility, pregnancy, birth from a quantum biology perspective. So I feel like in some ways we're at the point, if you look at hormones, like real research into the study of the hormones of birth, we're only 10, maybe 20 years into nuanced, in-depth, detailed research on the hormones of pregnancy and birth aside from like the very basic levels. So we've seen researchers like Sarah Buckley, Dr. Buckley, doing research, like in-depth research into the hormones of birth, and we're still seeing a lot of up and coming research about that. And with quantum biology, I think it's like where we were with hormones a decade ago. We're at the very beginning of really having researchers start to look into this, and really having birth workers and practitioners start to explore, how does this apply to the women that I'm working with on a day-to-day basis. So I feel like we're at a really exciting time, and we're also at a time where this is just new research and we're going to be learning so much. But I want to share it with you now, because I know that many of you are having your babies right now, and in a decade you may be through your baby having phase. So I want to share it now because, again, it's cutting edge, I guess, but it's also really complementary to what we've already been studying, and it fits well within a holistic framework, and it can help solve issues. Like I said, like solving nausea problems and morning sickness. I actually had to do a big project for my midwifery school on hyperemesis gravidarum, and I've gone back and revised some of the protocols and things that I designed for that, looking at it from a quantum biology perspective, because can quantum biology help with some of that? I believe that it can. I actually believe that the best time to prevent pregnancy complications from a nutritional and quantum biological perspective is when you're trying to conceive, or when you're preparing to conceive, and then when, because once you've conceived, you've got the baby on the way. So now, as you're trying to conceive, or as you're preparing to try and conceive, is a great time to look at what is quantum biology and how can that help you. So one thing to remember is we're talking about food. And first and foremost, energy does come from food. Like if we think about the process of digestion, we eat food and that goes into our body, and our body breaks that down to use as energy. Some of it is literally energy, like when we think about carbs or sugars, they give us energy, or our children are running all over the place because they had sugar. And then also some of it, like protein, becomes the building blocks of cells and everything. So our food does break down onto an energetic level. But also energy comes from the sun, it comes from nature, it comes from contact in nature. So one of the things that I talked with the women who went through my fertility class about was, I talked to them about being in nature and also polarity, and that polarity was important. And we talked about that some in the context of men and women's relationships, like being in masculine and feminine energy, because that's kind of a living representation of polarity. But also we know that polarity is important in nature and important in energy. And so you've probably heard some of like nature bathing or things like that, or people will tell you go out. You may have heard about grounding or earthing. These are all concepts that you may have heard of. And this is something that I will admit, like I have a weakness of, or I have had a weakness of. I've done much better in past summers than I have like the last couple summers, because last summer I lost my mom and things were crazy, and this summer there's been a lot going on with my adult kids and working on getting my house ready to sell and everything, and I can like feel the lack. Like I'm trying to figure out, like, is there some time this week that I can go to a nature trail that I like, that has a little stream, and like just walk the trail, just have my feet on the earth, dip my toes in the stream, just be out in nature for a little bit, because I'm kind of craving it. And I think what my body is craving is that energy and that polarity reset, and that what you pick up being in that environment. And it's equalizing to our bodies and to our cells. It's like we think about being with trees and humans breathing, and you think about, you breathe in oxygen, out carbon dioxide, and the tree is the opposite, and there's this synergistic thing. And there's also a synergistic flow of energy between you and nature. And then also the sunlight gives energy. So that's another source of energy that comes into our world, energy, heat, and that sort of thing. So those are really important sources of energy. And just as food is nourishing to your body, that time in nature and that energy that you absorb there, the polarity that you experience there, is also really good for your body on a deep and cellular level. And quantum biology also really ties into circadian rhythms. And this is probably intuitive to you if you are thinking about, nature and being in tune with the cycles of nature, like day and night and the seasons and that kind of thing. And then you think about honoring your circadian rhythms is often in sync with that, especially if we put aside the glowing screens and turn down the artificial lights. we as humans tend to be relatively in sync with nature. You've always had your night owls, but most people tend to be fairly in sync with the natural world. This is really pertinent to both male and female health. So actually quantum biology and nutrition as well. That's why in my fertility class, I talk a lot about both moms and dads, because all of this is really pertinent. Like once we get to pregnancy, we're mostly talking about you, mama, but in the preconception and conception phase, like mom and dad's health are both really, really, really important. And so looking at nutrition and energy and quantum biology and all of that, both for men and women, is really, really important. So the first thing that you want to do to get in tune with those circadian rhythms and to start looking at how do I incorporate this quantum health into my life is looking at natural light versus digital light. So when you have natural light versus, I guess I should say artificial light, though most of us are looking at screens, like all of that artificial light, it lowers melatonin, which is a hormone that's really important. And again, talking about the continued hormonal research that we're doing into birth, we're just on the beginning of starting to explore how melatonin impacts pregnancy and especially childbirth. And we know that low melatonin levels can delay labor. So women need to sleep. So anyways, that was a little bit of a rabbit trail, but coming back to how do we keep our melatonin levels optimal? Well, one of the things is letting go of the artificial light and spending more time in the bright natural light, and put the screens away early. Like what Nico would tell you, and I'm pointing to my window here, is that in the morning, get up, get going, get moving, be out in the bright natural light, and then eat a good hearty meal, because that's primed everything for you. Oh, it's time to be awake. It's time to be up. I've got some energy. I've spent some time in nature. And also that wakes up your gut bacteria. Did you know that your microbiota in your gut is less active at night and more active in the morning when it gets that wake up call? It's just this, again, this interconnectedness of our entire being with the natural world. We have to look at that and be in awe of that in a way, and also respect and honor that. So we've got this interconnectedness, and then at night, as the twilight comes and it starts to get darker, it starts to say goodbye to screens. It doesn't mean you can't ever stay up and watch a movie or something, but especially if you're trying to conceive a baby, try and get to the point where you're wrapping up that work that's on, especially a digital screen at night, and then dim the lights, lower the lights, and allow your body to start to pick up on the cues that it's time to go to bed. And bedtime rituals and that sort of thing are helpful. But really getting rid of the artificial light or dimming it progressively and letting go of the screen time at night is really going to help you a lot. Quality of sleep is really important, because your body needs to restore and heal those gut bacteria need to calm down. Your cells need a chance to regenerate. And if it's nighttime and you're pregnant, of course, your baby's being built. So what research has shown is that avoiding shift work may be helpful, especially for men. It seems to be helpful. More sleep definitely seems to equate more sperm. When a man is getting less than 5 hours of sleep a night, you see a marked decrease in his sperm levels. If he's getting more than 8 hours, you see a marked increase in sperm levels. So sleep appears to be something that's really important, especially to men. Waking up may contribute to lower sperm, but evidence on that is pretty weak in the research. Ultimately, the duration seems more important, as well as controlling for any kind of comorbidities, so helping remove issues like sleep apnea. We also know that poor sleep can really dysregulate female fertility as well. So getting into that circadian rhythm cycle where you're up in the day and where you're sleeping and sleeping well at night can be really nourishing from that quantum energy perspective. And then again, light and dark are so important. You want to have, in the daytime, you want to have light in your rooms, and ideally you're going to work near a window. So if you're working during the day, be it at a job or you're homemaking, you want to make sure that you're with windows. So have your kitchen windows open, your house windows open if you're working around the house. If you're at the office, ideally, I know this isn't the case, especially if you're a cubicle warrior, but ideally at the office, have the windows open. If you're a teacher and teaching, have the windows in your classroom open if it's not too distracting to your kids. And that doesn't necessarily mean open like with the screens, but just no curtains or blinds so that there's lots of light coming in. And again, that just getting up and getting going in the morning can be really beneficial and give your body that sign like, okay, let's get up and get going. and really honoring that light and dark is really helpful. Yeah, and then developing a very deep connection or a direct connection to the earth and the sun can be helpful. So, of course, time outdoors and in nature is good. I haven't gotten to where we are doing this yet, but I love the concept of 1,000 hours outside. I'll link to that below, which is kind of an initiative to encourage families and children to spend more time outside. And that is really going to be beneficial for you, especially if you are barefoot or in some sort of earthing shoe, or you're touching nature. Being in water, Nico Kennedy says that being in water really counts almost triple. So whether that's swimming or having your feet in the water, or, you know, sitting on a log and trailing your hands in the water or whatever, but that exposure to nature, that being in nature, that touching the tree bark, that looking at the leaves, that smelling, smelling the good air. My kids and I have started our homeschool year as I'm recording this, and we take a nature walk every afternoon if we can, and it's just so lovely, and I enjoy the smells. And even in the wintertime, I enjoy being outside. Now in the winter, it's a lot harder to have that direct connection with nature because you're probably all bundled up. But at least if you're out there, it's really helpful. And even if the light is lower in the winter, if you're outside, at least you're getting a bit more direct contact with that light. And that can be really helpful. So spending that time outdoors and in nature, waking and sleeping more in line with the sun. And again, coming to winter, that can be harder if you're farther north of the equator or farther south of the equator, because you're ending up getting less daylight hours in the winter. But it is something to consider. Can you at least have the lights dimmer in the evening as you're doing a little bit of work and still try and limit that screen time? If you can get food from close to your home, such as from a farmer's market, a CSA, a local farmer, and that sort of thing, then that's going to be really good. And especially if it's grown using sustainable farming practices, it's because we're looking at it from this energetic perspective. And so there's less fossil fuel type energy to get the food to you. And then there's also just that, that wholesomeness of this came from my area. It was hopefully grown with some level of love and intention, harvested with intention, chosen with intention, if you've gone to pick it out at the farmer's market or the natural food co-op or the like. So, that's just good for you. It's really nourishing for you. And then sunshine is really good. Again, being out in that energy, getting that sunshine on you. Sunshine is good for you and for your baby to be as well. And I already mentioned, but earthing shoes, you can also get grounding sheets for your bed. I do not have grounding sheets, so I have not yet experienced if there's any strong benefit that I can feel from them. But I find it to be an intriguing concept, and I'm pointing to my bed again over here, ladies. But a grounding sheets work by, you have a set of sheets that you put on your bed, and they are connected to a rod that goes through a grounding hole in your electric outlet. So there's not an electric charge, it's a grounding hole, but it is bringing that contact with the earth, and those ions and that energy, that positive energy from the earth is coming up into your sheets in that way. And it's similar with an earthing shoe. Your shoe is a natural material, or there's a post going through the sole of the shoe that is in contact with the world. So you want to have, the goal is to have that contact with earth and contact with nature. And so things like earthing shoes or grounding shoes can be helpful for that. Or if you have a place where you can go barefoot, that's another option, of course. And then coming back to the food, eating, dense, minimally processed, or deep nutrient-rich foods that are minimally processed, there we go, is really important. So closer to an ancestral diet, like what our ancestors would have eaten, with less processed foods, or in some cases, not processed, but perhaps carefully prepared. So fermented foods or slow roasted meats that really unlock some of the nutrients from those. So looking at some of those ancestral practices that people had that really helped bring bone broths, that sort of thing, because that brings the positive energy from the food, again, especially if it's local food, and it also cooks in a way that is going to enhance the nutrition of the food rather than detract from it. Superfoods are, of course, good. I go over a lot of superfoods in the fertility course. And then timing eating with the circadian rhythms, which basically means eating in season and also like not eating in the middle of the night, but eating in the day. So Nico recommends like eating just before sunset, eating at dawn as you're getting going for the day, and eating those seasonal foods. Those things can really help. And some of the foods that you eat can help with being antioxidant, like berries and those sorts of things we know are antioxidant foods. And then that time in nature and honoring the circadian rhythm, all of that can help clean up kind of oxidative stress, which is, that's a level of cellular damage. So this quantum biology is a holistic approach to help balance that, at least, because you do have some oxidative changes in the body that are normal. But we want to balance that out, and we want to make sure that it's not becoming overwhelming. So I wanted to keep this as kind of a brief introduction. So I know this podcast episode is shorter than most of them, but I wanted to keep it as a brief introduction to quantum fertility. And then we're going to come back and talk about some fertility strategies in the next podcast episode as well. So I will talk to you then.